today?
Oh, I'm great. Good.
Very excited to have you.
Lovely fall unfolding here. Yeah.
We've had a bunch of snow the last few days, which is brilliant. And you're joining us from Ottawa today?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So you are a psychiatrist.
Just came back from San Francisco a couple of months ago. Yeah.
You're a world traveler. Yeah, I love that. It's really fun and a pleasure to have you on the show. I've just started becoming familiar with your personal work, and I'm very excited about it because I think it's an important bridge between this kind of less mechanistic frame around how are we getting these transpersonal experiences into our psyche.
Yes, it's. I feel, looking back my life, I feel like a bridge, between the transpersonal and the academia, which is nice because the academia takes me as an academician and are willing to listen to me, even if I talk about things that otherwise they would, if instead of genetics you start talking about past lives, they think you're joking, but they can still hear it. They still listen.
That's wonderful. So you are a psychiatrist. You've done some work at the WHO. You've done a lot of neurobiology work. How do you like to briefly summarize your career, which your career is still going, which I'm very thankful for?
Well, I really wanted to study the nature of consciousness. I was very interested in philosophy initially. I had, I know now I have idea where it came from, but I was planning to build the planetary ships. That was my dream until I came across Freud. Both of us, Stan and I, at the same time, and that took me to medicine. And there I initially thought I would be a child psychiatrist because, of course, Freud gives you that impression that it's all in the childhood. But there were political flips, and I ended up in psychopharmacology. And so, our directions were very different from Stan, and we eventually ended up at the same conclusions, which was very interesting. Yes, I spent a lot of time, doing classical traditional psychiatry, looking for the sources of mood disorders somewhere in the brain, and not finding it, finding huge number. There are huge changes in the brain when you get into non-early states of consciousness, like severe melancholia or mania. But the big surprise was that these changes do not differentiate between the type of experiences, whether the same, qualitatively the same types of changes, whether you're experiencing the hell of depression, which is one of the, according to the people's description, the worst thing that you can experience. I had a number of patients who had some very severe medical problems, like cancer of pancreas and so on, and they said, I would always choose that over melancholia. Or when you feel the heaven of manic state, where you have unlimited energy, absolutely euphoric, you can have all kinds of mystical experiences. So we ended up essentially at the same conclusions. The nice thing about studying classical bipolar disorder, classical manic depressive illness, is that you have these three very distinct types. You have two non-ordinary states of consciousness, one very positive, one absolutely negative. And then you have these people have periods of time where they are in full remission. If they don't tell the psychiatrist about the past, he would not recognize that they can suffer from this serious illness. We found some neurobiological differences even at that time, but it's costs thousands of dollars any testing. It's not practical at all. In serotonin regulation, but it actually regulates the my conclusion is that the understanding of mood disorders is very incomplete. The main problem is not the neurobiology, but the problem is how it influences the oscillatory processes in the brain. And anybody who had, let's say, LSD, I would particularly think about LSD, but I'm sure it's similar in other psychedelics. When you're out of the session, there can be there are flashbacks, and they can go for 6 months, 9 months. There's no substance, no psychedelic substance in the body anywhere, but you will still have these experiences because the brain, continues oscillating in the oscillating activity. So I'm now focusing on writing a book and articles about that, because I don't know whether you are aware of it, but the results of midstream or mainstream psychiatry with bipolar disorders are very poor, relatively speaking, given the number of substances that are usable and effective, but they are used poorly. And that's based on the wrong assumption that that's something you just have to fix some chemistry in the brain and everything is going to be fine.
Right.
I don't know whether
from what I understand,
summarizes 65 years in psychiatry, but
65 years in psychiatry is very impressive.
I think the reason I'm putting it so in such a succinct way is that I believe we are at the beginning of new era. I think over the next 20, 30 years, it will become clear. We need to really start understanding the nature of consciousness under normal circumstances and in non-ordinary states. And then I think it will be easier to deal with these conditions. And wonderful thing about psychedelics is that it brought in ways of treating situations, helping situations that we could not touch previously, and that's wonderful. For example, when somebody becomes very acutely suicidal, that there were really no ways to influence it, to get them quickly out of the misery. Now, with ketamine, you can, whether it's intranasally or intramuscularly or intravenously, you can get them out of that state, out of that obsession about killing oneself within 15 minutes.
Right.
So that's just one example. I mean, there are many other situations where psychedelics can deal with problems, emotional problems that we could not touch in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It does appear as though psychiatry, once onboarded appropriately with these drugs, is going to improve. But we have to do some, I guess, serious science and research. Or how do you see the next phase of, well, say you had the magic wand, Paul. Like how would you like to see all these drugs included in a helpful way in the pharmacopoeia?
Well, they have to be a part of it, but it has to be. There should be some license specifically for that, so that people are properly trained. That they do not just handle it as there's just another drug that I'm going to give to the person, but that they are aware of how different it is. That really there needs to be proper preparation for any session. The person has to be properly informed. They have to have some idea about the maps of consciousness that they can enter. They have to develop good rapport with the therapist, whoever it is. And then the session has to be supported properly and properly integrated. It's I don't think that's generally known, but when, for example, in Maryland Psychiatric Research Institute back in the late 60s, early 70s, they were dealing with high doses of LSD, people who had severe problems with alcohol. They had all sessions, but there were many people, who a year later were completely free of the problems, a number of them who came back. And it was dependent on the integration, whether the person took the insights from the session and put it in practice, included it in their life. Then they stayed free of the addiction. If it was just like tripping, then it was interesting experience, but did not change. So I think it's very important that people are properly trained. It should be available. Now, I'm talking about healing, of course, the use of psychedelics for spiritual purposes, for personal growth, and that is a different issue. And for that, I think there should be centers, centers where you have enough staff, physicians, non-physicians, psychologists, providing proper support, and they should have availability of all psychedelics in that situation, depending.
That's interesting.
On the person. But that's not all. I can see the possibility that if this continues as it has been, and I believe it will, the Renaissance will continue. I can give you the reasons why I believe strongly. If people have enough positive experiences, kind of mystical type of experiences, it will change the society. Because once you experience, not just in your head, but in your body, in your soul, that we are all made from one dough, how could you behave like people behave now? And the numbers people with these experiences is increasing quite dramatically. I'm participating in the ketamine group online. There's over 2,500 therapists. So just if each of them treats 30, 40, 50 clients, and a number of them will have positive experiences, it will have also, I think, positive societal impact.
I love the phrase "cut from the same dough," Paul. Yeah. I feel it. Is that more of a Czech phrase?
Many ways one can phrase it.
I love it though. It's great. It's feels really, really great. So, and I tend to agree with you. I believe these bigger experiences can shift people into more of this mystical frame that we kind of talk about, where we are all one. and we're not really all that different from each other. And
Yep.
yeah, and never mind the insight of we're kind of aiming at infinite growth on a finite planet. We really need to come together to steward this thing properly. Yeah. So I wanted to talk briefly in our previous talk where we were kind of preparing for this conversation. You mentioned the rate at which college undergrads are having really serious distress entering undergraduate programs. I think it was a very high percentage of first years are having very extreme problems. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, that certainly worries me, and I'm working on the past 5 years. I've been working on some new ways of helping in that direction. And we can speculate why this is happening, but first of all, World Health Organization shows very clearly that there is global increase in depression, anxiety, addictions, alcoholism, but it's even more pronounced in the young generation. We carry out with Professor Duffy the past 30 years followed children and grandchildren of our patients, and then we have a control group of a couple of thousand people, and there you see, and it's very similar. The most recent U.S. data, it's at least 1/3, sometimes 40% of these people who have not been identified as having problems. When they are seen by a physician, evaluated, they all meet criteria for significant psychiatric disorder. There is, in terms of depression, alcoholism, addiction, anxiety, and there's like 14-15% of young women who are acutely suicidal. I just was in September. I was in Europe and seen some similar problems in terms of how long it takes for these young people to be seen by somebody, not to be treated, just to be seen, to be evaluated in the practice. I don't talk about my group, but in the practice, let's say in Ottawa, it's the capital of Canada, and I see young people who are waiting 4, 5, 6 months to be seen, and they are depressed and suicidal. So we are working on the past 4 or 5 years, have been developing a technique. It's called Healing Intention Circle, where people can help themselves, because there are ways of connecting with non-ordinary states, and the field that connects us, there people can help each other. So we've developed a technique, kind of a remote approach. People can create groups and influence each other positively.
I think that's a great way to do it.
Young girl, she was waiting. She was depressed, suicidal, 17 years old, waiting for to be seen, have consultation, waiting for 4 months, and it was possible to do remotely one session using this technique and get her well, get her out of the depression, get her out of the suicidal. So I'm afraid that in this present situation, the traditional healthcare systems will not be sufficient to provide adequate. They are not doing it even now, and it seems to be getting worse. So I certainly want to continue developing some techniques where people can help themselves. Use this connection that we have in the unified field, that this is, the worldview has been changing. I mean, during the past century, it started with some quantum physics and astronomy, but gradually a new worldview developed in all hard sciences. And so it's clear we have now information from those hard sciences how we are connected. There is a field that's connecting us. I mean, the best example for that is, for example, the twins that are identical twins that are separated, have to be separated, adopted away at birth. And then you've seen some of these programs, haven't you?
Yes.
Then 30, 40
Could you explain
years.
it a little bit?
Sorry?
Could you explain it briefly?
Yeah. Well, it started in Minnesota. They had excellent genetic programs, and so in late 1970s they started studying these twins, identical twins that were after birth adopted to different families, and sometimes as far as one in Minnesota, one in Australia. And then the idea was that this will help us to answer the question, what is in the genes and what is in the environment that will be separated. But unexpectedly, we got more than we asked for. It also turned out that these twins are connected. They 30, 40 years, they meet each other for the first time, and they are dressed the same way, they have the same tie, they have the same dress, they have the same kind of desires, they drink the same beer, smoke the same cigarettes, often they have wives, they married wives with the same name, and sometimes named children by either same or very similar names. So the only explanation, this is through a field connection, and that's of course something that we can also utilize for benefit.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty interesting. What was the name of that study one more time so people can look it up?
Well, it's twins that are identical twins separated at birth.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And they have several hundred of just twins in Minnesota, at the University of Minnesota.
Thank you. So the next hot button here, Paul, is around this link between how do we go from these kind of, wet biocomputers to the transpersonal, right? There seems to be some sort of missing link between how kind of mechanistic scientific people aren't really able to accept the evidence from a lot of transpersonal work or high dose psychedelic work because there's so many exceptional things, but it sounds like you have a framework for how this could work.
Yes, I mean, there are two issues there. One is certainly education. It's not just first of all, I think it has to become very clear that brain plays a role in consciousness, but does not generate the experiences. The experiences come from outside, from some fields. And this is not only, I think the evidence for that is not only in neurobiology that, as I mentioned, you find huge differences when people are in non-rest states, but it does not differentiate between experiences. But this is only one part. The other thing is, of course, the evidence from near-death experiences, where if you study, and there's now over 70, 80 studies all over the world showing clearly that some type of consciousness continues beyond the demise of the brain. you know. It's not just that. And then there is, of course, a number of very serious studies that have been done in psychic phenomena, for example, remote viewing. And I believe that story is, I believe, known. The fact that, you know, the American army became interested in remote viewing for military purposes. So for about 30, 40 years, this research was well funded and done in the Stanford Research Institute, and showed very clearly high statistical evidence, checked by the head of American Statistical Association, confirmed that these are significant facts, that you can perceive things at other locality without senses, with intuitive processes. So there's a whole body that I think people need to be educated. That's number one. Number two is the most dramatic change in worldview is having a psychedelic experience, having a good psychedelic experience.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
It's experience of non-ordinary states of consciousness that convinces people most. And it does not have to be psychedelics. It could be pre-cognitive, for example, pre-cognitive dream, you know, where there are no books collecting these experiences. Well, let's say somebody has a dream, very vivid dream about a car accident right in front of their house, and it has it for a couple nights, and the third day it happens exactly the way he dreamt it. So you cannot explain that by consciousness coming from the brain. So it's a large body of experiences that convinces people that, you know, there is more to consciousness than just brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's very...
So both of these things, I think, the education showing the whole body of evidence that is really, and the body, of course, body also has fields. Heart has a field. So my understanding at this point is, my hypothesis is, based on these facts, that consciousness is really taking place. It's a cooperative event between brain, body, and fields of consciousness, where the brain plays a role in who is predisposed for entering non-ordinary states easily. Brain plays a role, from our longitudinal studies over 60 years, brain plays a role in terms of timing. There are times in everybody's brain where you're much more predisposed to having non-ordinary states of experience, and the body plays a role, because I think therapists know that there are many experiences. If they are traumatic experiences and you want to heal them, you have to go and work on the body as well, because it's often stored in the body, in the muscle, in possibly in the heart, and this together then plays a role in generating consciousness. But the experiences, the evidence clearly indicates that it's coming from outside. And I think once it's the past 25 years have been different. I think there's a fair number of scientists opening up to the idea that you cannot explain phenomena of consciousness, particularly non-ordinary states of consciousness, from the brain. And so that research is expanding, and once that's accepted, I think we're going to be at a different level of understanding, and possibly a different level of society.
Yeah, can't really get it soon enough these days. So
no, this happens very, very, very slowly. I mean, I was sitting at my brother Stan first LSD session back in November 1956, and it was only 5 years ago that I've seen the results of the insights that he started having at that time, and working with clients with psychedelics. But the message was getting out very, very slowly. And it was really in 2017 when the University of California in San Francisco had a couple of days celebrating his work. And suddenly I saw these 300 people coming from different parts of the world, being influenced by something that was started back in 1956. So sometimes I think the research has to catch up with some innovations, and it can happen slowly.
Do you have a idea of a study that could help move this forward further? Because people seem to just write off a lot of these studies, and I wonder
which studies specifically.
Generally, any study that feels transpersonal, a lot of rigid mechanist researchers will just write off because it might make them miss a promotion or something, or maybe it just doesn't feel rigorous to them for some reason. Clash with their metaphysics, maybe.
That's very interesting when you come to academia, how differently many academicians behave publicly, and when you sit down with them, they say, "Oh, I know about that. I had this precognitive dream, or I had this," or my breakthrough in research was just intuition. Yes, I worked on the issue for 30 years, but the solution suddenly came during the night. I don't think there is I cannot think of a single experiment that would change things. It's a gradual. Some people will not accept facts. Well, why should I tell you? Look at the elections. How many people just do not accept the facts that Trump is a criminal, and despite all the facts. And it's the same, I think, it takes a while changing it. There's a number of studies that need to be done gradually to convince people. But some people will only change when they have transpersonal experience, and then they're open to.
Right.
It was not easy for me. It was a gradual process. Yes, I had a kind of feeling that there is much more than the material world right from the start. But before you come to conviction, it's a slow process. Because we are social animals. We are social animals. We are so much influenced. Yeah, I of course, we lived under communists for several decades, and when I came to visit Stan and then Russians invaded, I stayed, and it took me several years before I started feeling comfortable listening to talking about personal things on the phone, because there I knew that our phone was bugged because Stan was, my brother was in jail for a period of time. So I could not shake it off rationally. These things, this kind of worldview things take a while to change.
That's a good way to put it. Can you explain a little bit from your perspective why body work might be really important for psychedelic sessions? I know pretty well why for breath work, but I haven't heard it lately around psychedelics.
Well, I assume that's because body is really involved in memory, particularly in storing traumas. There's a lot of evidence in that. One of the striking pieces of evidence is, for example, heart transplants. It's become very well documented that sometimes if somebody has a heart transplant, the recipient, the donor is gone, dead, okay? And the family agrees to donate his heart to somebody who needs it. And now the recipient starts exhibiting some characteristics, psychological characteristics of the donor who is long gone. It's well documented, and it's documented both by the observations of the family from the donor and the recipient. Body is storing memories in a way. Most often in collaboration with the brain, but sometimes independently. And so I assume that that's the reason why in therapy we have to often go into the body to free particularly some painful memories.
That's interesting. Is there a certain mechanism we know about for bodies being involved in the memory system?
Well, there are cells, there are tissues that are storing things. Some people in honorary state sometimes experience actually consciousness of particular tissues in their body, or like consciousness. And it's not unusual in non-ordinary states of consciousness that people sometimes have the kind of the experiences they have are related to the particular tissue or particular organ in their body. They see the cells. So, it's also we are 80%, at least 80% water that has storing abilities. It's, first of all, I think people have to open up to these ideas, and then we can start looking and exploring the actual mechanisms that are involved.
Right. So the book I found out about Stan in 2001 was Michael Talbot's Holographic Universe, and it lays out this really interesting holographic mind theory.
Yes.
And I think that was related to Carl Pribram's work, maybe on
Yes.
Removing chunks of the brain, allegedly storing memory, and there was no actual loss of memory by that method. Do you think there's something there?
Actually,
still?
That's been shown back in the 20s, 30s by Lashley, by the psychologist. That was in animals at that time, but he trained certain animals in certain behavior, and then he would remove the parts of the cortex that was responsible for normally storing it. And so, of course, they recovered from the surgery, lost that ability, and 3-4 months later suddenly started acting and showing the presence of those reflexes, although that part of brain was gone. So clearly there are some outside field mechanisms involved in memory processes.
I forgot about Lashley. Studied him a long time ago.
I think there's presumably interplay of brain and the fields, but you first have to accept the existence of those fields and create experimental designs to look at the collaboration of brain and the fields.
Mm-hmm. So one critique I get sometimes from friends, or really I'll name it, Lenny Gibson, he'll kind of challenge the field concept with his framework around Alfred North Whitehead and fields perhaps looking too mechanistic. But I think we're not talking about fields in the same way as we talk about magnetism, right? We're talking about fields in a more of an abstract way.
No. I mean, that's very easy. I mean, electromagnetic fields are completely dependent on distance. They work up to a certain distance, and that's it. If you look at these twins between Australia and Minnesota, that it's completely independent. The phenomenon is independent of distance. It's somehow tied up with the unified field that is everywhere. So Lenny is quite correct if he objects against mechanistic explanation of the fields. This is called subtle types of energy, not electromagnetic types of energy.
I think there's something around so as we proceed into this strange landscape of the transpersonal, we have to look at what models might be helping us here. And I think a good foundation point is physics. And I always fall back on this kind of quantum entanglement theory where, Einstein called it spooky action at a distance because it made him very uncomfortable. But we're seeing very much faster than light communication, which implies that there's some sort of unity spread across this time and space.
Absolutely.
And I think, not necessarily saying like, oh, heaven's up there, hell's down here, and there's like fields surrounding them. It's a little different than that. It's like
hell and heaven right here.
Right. And we have access to everything right here, right now. And this is my experience with holotropic breathwork, is we've just got so much access to so many experiences that it really over time just seems to break your default metaphysics.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't know. I think the entanglement and the quantum phenomena are certainly a good model. Whether it is that simple that mind actually interacts at that level, it's not quite clear, but it's a helpful model. It's help us understanding how that can be connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, to me, entanglement's more like a pointing at it.
Roger Penrose and some people are not quite happy about the metaphor, but it's a good one. It's a helpful one.
Have you been in communication with Ervin Laszlo about his work on field? He calls it the Akashic Records, and I feel like that's a complicated word choice, but I understand what he's getting at. Is there a way that work plays into this kind of like transpersonal biological bridge for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I thought that this concept is brilliant. Essentially, he started with the connectedness hypothesis, and that's something I think that's demonstrated in all hard sciences now, since over 100 years. And it's interesting that somebody who was essentially a concert pianist came up with this kind of good integration. And he's still quite productive now with the Laszlo Institute and pushing things forward, certainly.
So you said integration, and I want to chat about integration briefly. It's catchphrase du jour lately in the psychedelic space, and I know it's really important, but I cringe sometimes because I think there's not really a good agreement on what we all mean by integration. Do you have a definition you like to work with around integration?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's important for the participant to be able to formulate what he experienced, because things feel differently just in the mind and when they are formulated. And I think for me the other important thing is, did the person get some insights, some understanding of whatever troubles him, whatever he wants to change, whatever's happened in his life, whatever the purpose of his life is. And then explore with the person how they can, what kind of changes they should make in their life. And for me, the model for that is what happened with the alcoholics, And I have seen unfortunately, many people as patients who were tripping for a number of years without any integration and without any benefit, without any obvious achievement of what they thought should change in their life.
Right, actual change. I think that's helpful. Like, what are those actual changes that need to be made to include those lessons?
Expressing what they experience in the session, putting it in words in some way that they can wrap their mind around that, and then exploring any insights that would help them to move either in the practical life or in their spiritual understanding of themselves. I think ideally if it helps somebody to start understanding that they actually function at two levels. One is the daily kind of existence in the embodied existence, and then there is the other transpersonal domain that connects you with your, quote, soul, unquote, and that both things are happening at the same time, and that you need to recognize that, and sessions usually help you to recognize that, and then in the daily functioning always know which of these two dimensions you actually are at the moment.
So I have a fun one for you. One of my largest concerns around the development of psychedelics into medicine is that it will seemingly purely land in the purview of psychiatry, and there's a number of other places where I believe psychedelics could be very useful medically. right? Like, so neuroinflammatory conditions, generally inflammatory conditions, head injury, brain injury, really, limb loss, headache
Absolutely.
conditions, and a number of other things. Like, do you think there's a concern that psychiatry could inappropriately dominate these drugs and not share them with other fields, or is that a little far out?
It all depends on the people that use them. Obviously, the data about the use of psychedelics in other conditions is are coming out. Just psoriasis, for example, most recently. The things that are chronic conditions that are usually not effectively treated by medicine. So I think as the data from the experiments will be made more available, I don't think it's gonna stay with psychiatry. I mean, you probably saw that with holotropic breathwork, at least I have, that certain difficulties, certain predicaments that we deal with have roots in your daily life, in your relationship at work, or early in childhood. But then there are some problems that you can only access when you go back into womb, back into your perinatal kind of experiences. And then there are some experiences that the energy is strangled, trapped in beyond that. It looks like past life, whatever that is. Because I don't think that's necessarily a linear issue. I think you are more connected with some space of consciousness that is tied up with you. But those things, when you have a physical illness that is in these transpersonal areas, then only inducing non-ordinary states of consciousness will help. Now, that doesn't have to be psychedelics. It could be holotropic breathwork. It could be hypnosis. It could be other ways. It's just the psychedelic is one of the fastest ways to get there, if it's well done and properly done.
Now we're seeing a lot of training programs come through,
Yep.
and they're not all really created equally, right?
No, too many.
Some
Too many.
There's definitely too many programs, and yeah, too many of them are definitely not really up to the task. And one of the problems I see is that a lot of these programs are not including the transpersonal, the perinatal, just the general cartography of the psyche. They're not including this kind of expanded map. Do you see any issues with trainings not including those things?
Oh, absolutely. It's unfortunate, and there are also many people giving psychedelics that they themselves have not had such experience and just handle it as another. Particularly some of the ketamine clinics, that's frightening. Where, from what people tell me, they just walk in. There's some secretary that gets quickly kind of description of the problems. Then, if it's a better place, then there may be a social worker or a nurse that will see you, and then there is a doctor who shoots ketamine, and half an hour later you are out. This is frightening, but those are the problems of new fields. It comes with good and bad, and we have to work hard to focus more and more on doing it the right way. But the problem is, for example, in Canada, we worked with the Health Canada to create a kind of a committee that would have an oversight from all involved people, psychiatrists, other physicians, psychologists, therapists, all spiritual teachers, and it's very difficult to achieve that. They say, we first of all show us double-blind studies, and this is such a nonsense. I actually happened to write a book on design of trials for World Health Organization, jointly brought into it a number of other experts, and this does not make sense. I mean, yes, if you test some substance, if it works for anxiety or some minor types of depression, yes, it's important that the assessment is blind. But if a therapist and the patient cannot recognize who is on placebo and who has 100 micrograms LSD or psilocybin in effective dosage, then they have to be pretty uneducated not to differentiate it. That's not a problem. What the design has to deal with factors that can cause some confusion or wrong evaluation, and that's not the placebo effect in these studies. That's the issue of quality of the therapist, quality of the supportive psychotherapy, the set issues, the person's, the recipient of the session, their understanding of the situation. Those are things that one needs to balance in some way. Not the placebo effect. That's not a problem. And it's sad, and it just shows why things progress so slowly. I mean, you know about the recent decision about MDMA. There were 11, presumably some of the top psychopharmacologists, or certainly well-recognized psychopharmacologists. But this is about psychotherapy using psychedelic. This is inappropriate completely group. It was the same when it came to WHO in 1984, and I was chairing this committee, and there were 24 other members, and they were very good experts at toxicology, drug issues, very good issue on policing. There were people from Interpol and so on, but they had no expertise about evaluating therapeutic value of MDMA. And this keeps repeating. We have to change the design for these studies in a rational way, controlling for the confounding factors in the study, not for things that are there and both the recipient and the therapist will immediately recognize who is on psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's certainly something to solve. I I like the idea of comparing, not necessarily, placebo controlled, but doing a side by side with the best in class treatment.
Yep.
Saying like, is this
Yep.
even 5 to 20, 30% better? Great.
Sure.
Um, and I've heard one study design proposed around, okay, so we actually want data on all of these different drugs plus therapy. What if we just did, 14 people with each drug with this therapy for this indication, and like did 6 different drugs, and
Yep.
I think that's a better use of money than spending money on placebo at this point. That's
Absolutely.
my best guess.
Yeah. Because I think the designs, you are right. I think those would be ways to go, because psychedelics, in my opinion, are now here to stay. This is not a temporary, like back in the 60s, 70s. This is not a temporary phenomenon. If, first of all, it's, and for that reason, I think, there are pros and cons that it's medicine plays an important role, but the advantage is the fact that there are conditions now in medicine that can be only helped with psychedelics will assure that they will stay around. And then you have the media every day, at least over the past couple of years. Every day there is something about psychedelics on either internet, radio, television, and then there is the money in it. The pharmaceutical companies, 25 pharmaceutical companies that are putting big money and will keep it around. So psychedelics are here to stay, and in order to make them available, I think we're going to need good trials, because the health authorities, the regulatory authorities will not allow it otherwise, will hold back, and will be primarily, a lot of it will continue underground in addition to regular therapists.
Do you have any hope for new molecules coming that the developers are arguing are safer because there's not as much psychological experience or subjective experience compared to something like an LSD?
I don't. If you're asking about new molecules that do not induce non-early states of consciousness, they say well, psychotic or whatever, but it's essentially that's not going to work. I mean, that's why I've seen them working. That's the mechanism. That's the new thing, and I would be very surprised that things could work without that.
And here's one that's been
In
really
other words,
bothering
I
me.
think this is based still on the kind of mechanistic, materialistic idea that this is just another drug, and we just it's like with antidepressants, development went from effective drugs that had a lot of side effects to antidepressants that have much fewer side effects. The idea that if you look at the non-early states of consciousness as a side effect, that's just a wrong assumption.
Yeah, there's a lot of I've seen some really great arguments around the requirements of the visual field having stimulation for neurological arguments, and if we don't have this kind of modification of different sensory systems in the way psychedelics traditionally do, then we might also just not get that result we want.
That's my assumption.
Mm-hmm. So coming down the pipes, there's more people now than ever in history consuming psychedelic compounds. And it seems to be accelerating. And one thing I believe we're going to see with increasing frequency is spiritual emergency. And I really would prefer to see these people not end up in hospitals, but it's a real potential result. One thing I would love to see is some sort of network of spiritual emergence centers where people can go and have some supported downtime out of their lives. Have you thought about this concept?
Well,
or something similar?
I think these centers have been available. I remember that Christina Grof was, helping to run them, and my impression from internet is that some of them are still in existence. I think ideally, if the sessions are performed correctly, then dealing with the spiritual emergency should be the task of the therapist. Somebody who has hopefully trust of the client, trust of the patient. That would be my hope. Hospitals definitely are not the place, not the right place for that. That's obvious. But maybe as part of harm reduction, maybe these centers kind of should expand, so that people know as long as there is some inappropriate use of psychedelics, that when the spiritual emergency happens, that they know where to go. I have not checked on that. I've seen some kind of announced on the internet. Obviously, it's not enough. That's clear.
Yeah. From what I understand, there's maybe a few.
Yeah.
But we need a lot more than there is, and I think it really needs to be funded. I think,
Wouldn't it be more important? I don't know. Well, probably we need both. I would certainly. One way would be to improve the education of therapists, training of therapists. Well, probably both needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I don't think a lot of therapists understand that this is coming. It's usually pitched as, risk-free. And I think, as painful as spiritual emergence phenomena can be, it's just a sort of birthing of the new you. Yes. And something that should be supported and understood by, consented to, by people coming into this. Mm-hmm. And definitely interesting. Yeah, Spiritual Emergence Network, SEN. Some of my friends used to volunteer there a bunch, and they would route people particularly to therapists who could talk, but not necessarily to residential centers or something like that. But I think there's one or two in America. I don't know where else there are some. And similar to the Soteria House model. Who was that? Was that weird John Perry Barlow who had those? John Weir Perry? No.
Yeah, I think so. Well,
diabasis.
Look, yeah. This is not actually limited to psychedelics. I mean, we had those issues with holotropic breathwork as well. And what we did was we planned the sessions in a way where at least 3 people were available for the next 3 days. If somebody had intense spiritual emergency developing out of holotropic breathwork, that there would be at least 3 people. Somebody would always stay with the person until the difficult situation got resolved.
And I'll extend it further. I've heard a lot of emergencies coming out of the meditation space. So things like Vipassana,
Yeah.
people can require a lot of attention.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And finally, I know we're coming up towards the end, Paul, and thanks for sticking with us for so long. But I'm curious if you could talk about this concept of remote healing that you've been working on, that's taking advantage of this kind of field concept we discussed earlier. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yes, yeah, sure. The idea is not completely new. I mean, there are obviously healers who can do that alone, but I think there is a huge need. And I was teaching for about 5 years in the Living Institute in Toronto, and was teaching about this new world view emerging from hard sciences. And then occurred to me that I should be able to utilize that in my own work. And so we had, as I mentioned, started seeing this huge problems, breakdowns, even suicides in young people because of the increase of probably spiritual emergencies, but also simply increase in depressions and anxiety and suicidal behavior. And so I was looking at some systems, and what we do essentially, we have separate groups for English speaking and for French speaking here, and ideally it's a group of about 10 to 12 people, I think minimum six people, who identify some recipients, and people usually have several friends who need help with medical issues and with emotional issues. And so the groups, it's of course at least 2/3 are women. Partly they are more motivated, partly probably they have a bit more time. And so once a week or twice a week the group connects. The initial idea was that the group would get together, hold hands while we are doing that. And then of course pandemia came, and we quickly ended up on Zoom. And when the pandemia was over, it turned out actually that you can do that on Zoom quite effectively, and the advantage is that often during the whole year there was nobody missing, which if we met in person, of course, during the winter and parking problems and all that wouldn't work. So the groups are trying to meet together at least every 3 months, in person for some social event or healing. And it's important to get good information with the recipient, what the predicament is, and formulate it as specifically as you can. There are, in this unified field where we are connected, there are three kind of three types of understanding how you can influence it. One is human intention, and that of course can take you all the way to quantum physics, and how human mind can influence even events in matter. The other thing is of course positive emotions of love, compassion, caring, even joy. They connect with that area. And so the group identifies it's very helpful to have a picture, have a recent picture of the person. It's easier to focus on that. And so the members of the group alternate in doing kind of inductive meditation, where the purpose is essentially relax and then raise our vibrations using the positive emotions. Feelings of love, feeling of caring, feeling of compassion, to the point where eventually the group connects with the recipient and focuses, visualizes, and the other factor that works in the unified field is visualization. So you visualize the person healing. Like this week we worked with a person who had recently diagnosed a couple of weeks ago pancreatic cancer. So we were visualizing complete healing of that. Many people saw a kind of a healing light filling the body of the person until any problems disappeared. And then people share. Of course, the sharing is voluntary, but people generally, everybody likes to share. And what is amazing, there are several unexpected things. First of all, it's unexpected what people experience themselves in the group, how often the experiences are, the images or the experiences are identical, although most of the sessions are done on Zoom. The other unexpected factor is how close group feeling people develop. And finally, there's a number of studies that generally when you focus on helping other people, it has a very positive effect on the people who actually try to provide the help, try to provide the healing. There are data showing actually that it's even people who, it's not only that they are healthier, they have, when they participate in these activities of help to others. There are about 250 studies now that people are, they're more stable, they feel better, they feel emotionally better, physically better. There are even some data now on extension of life. So it's interesting. It's something that people can do themselves.
Yeah, that does seem really practical.
Yeah. And it can be combined, of course. It can be combined with any traditional medical help. Can be particularly offered while people wait for help.
Mm-hmm. So, is there anything
what would
about
be
your
very
work?
interesting, and I have not done that, and I'm not sure whether we'll get to that, would be, let's say, if the members would be microdosing, whether they would, improve. The benefit generally is about one third of the recipients benefit from the session, either immediately, and it's completely independent. We did some successful healing for people in Europe. We did successful healings for people, I think, in California. It's independent of distance. But it would be interesting. I wonder whether certainly if participants are meditators, I think it improves their concentration, visualization, and so the results are better. But it would be interesting if the members were, microdosing, if they would have easier access to the higher levels of consciousness.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm I'm a person that can't really visualize so well, kind of an aphantasia, but not all that serious. And I do wonder about the that bridge between how well you are visualizing and then the impact. But that would be a really interesting thing to look at.
Well, you might be able to look at it, your connection with the unified field maybe through other senses. You may be
Mm,
getting your intuition through smell. You can get your intuition through hearing or like a telepathic experience. Have you had some intuitive insights?
oh,
Uh,
plenty,
yeah.
plenty. Yeah.
So
Um,
you may have. There are other for women. I think particularly, for example, smell can be quite good source of intuition and a connection with the unified field. It's,
mm,
it's non-ordinary
hmm.
consciousness.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So, Paul, did we miss anything that you would love to share with folks?
Well, uh, you were talking about experiments. I think one area that really needs to be studied more is actually the variety of experiences people have. A lot of the work now is people get drug and how do you feel afterwards. But we really should know much more about what the huge variety of experiences that people have. And I believe strongly that we are at the new era, starting new era, and that the psychedelics are going to play a role in that, in particular in acceptance that consciousness is not limited to the brain. Um, and my hope is obviously that the non-ordinary states of consciousness and visiting them will help us to resolve and improve some of the social relationships and will happen in the future.
Mm, yeah, really good to see that. And I really just so thankful you shared your time with us today, Paul. This is really, really excellent. 65 years in psychiatry.
Yeah.
Um, just,
The other important thing is actually
mm,
how do the psychedelics compare in terms of the experiences and the benefits. Of course, so far we have a lot of impressions, but they are subjective and could not be really studied as long as the substances themselves are practically most of them, almost all of them, illegal, and yet it would be important. I've heard, for example, that from some of the recent studies, they're finding that the LSD sessions are easier for the participants. That there's some challenges with psilocybin sessions, that sometimes it activates some traumas. These things, we need to start looking at this. We need to start studying that. We don't know. I collected a lot of impressions, but of course, once there are kind of centers that Rick Doblin has been talking about, where there'll be trained therapists and there will be all psychedelics available, that would be a place where one could really start systematically investigating it. We need those answers.
hmm. I agree. Yeah, we do need a lot more comparative things, and I think a lot of people who are familiar with LSD would suggest perhaps yes, it would be a lot easier of an experience for folks to get through than heavier things like a psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine.
Well, I
Um,
mean, the problem is for practical reasons. I think 5-MeO DMT is advantageous because it works immediately, and within an hour you can have quite a good session. So that substances like that may be particularly helpful for the future.
Agreed. Yeah, I did a slightly longer 5-MeO protocol where we microdosed, so 3 administrations, small, large, and that was really interesting. And we had that experience last about 45 minutes, which was really clever, as opposed to like the 10 to 30 minute process alone.
Yes.
Yeah, it felt like there was more space for processing things than just holding on. Maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess there isn't much holding on with the full experience, but yeah. So where can people follow your work, Paul?
Well, we have lots on private YouTube because I was not happy with my ability to technically produce very good ones, but I'm gonna try to. Well, there's some material you can get it on openly on YouTube just using my name, but I'm gonna be releasing no more of these private videos that we have. I think I have now better understanding how to improve the technology of videos.
Well, thank you. Yeah, there's I've been loving some of the other interviews I've found of you online, and very, very happy we've connected, and I hope to follow your work closely and support it if I can. And yeah, just thank you so much for doing everything you've been doing for so long.
Well, thank you what you're doing for the field. The education is so important for the benefit from these substances.
Yeah, we'll keep it going.
Yep. Good luck.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Until next time.